On this episode of Real Wins, we dive into how leasing can be improved, even in a post-stabilized situation, by thinking through team structure and vacancies with a different mindset. If you find this and our other episodes helpful, please like and subscribe on YouTube or your preferred podcast listening app. Let's jump right in. Okay, Mike, welcome back to another episode. Here we are again. Today we are talking about leasing, but not your typical lease-up leasing. We're talking about post-stabilized leasing, which is a big conversation, and I think it's one that maybe isn't touched on enough kind of in these marketing, sales conversations that we have. Certainly, I don't see it discussed a ton across the industry in multifamily, but we like to talk about elephants here on Real Wins, so I think let's crack this one open and get to it. Leasing as a revenue function is something that you say all the time, and I think it really speaks to the leasing and furthermore long-term property management approach that you take at Charlesgate. Let's start there. How does that look different with your team versus kind of the status quo?
Yeah, well, let me identify the problem first. And the problem in the market is that most properties are considered operating well at a stabilized level at 93 or 94, maybe 95% occupancy. And we here don't believe that's good enough. We believe that stabilized occupancy should be 97, 98%, maybe even 99% across the year. And so we said, okay, let's think about what are the reasons why properties operate at 93, 94% stabilized occupancy or fully occupied at those levels. And for a lot of reasons, it's just this old school ingrained structural way of doing things that is just not necessary. And so that's at least first and foremost how we started attacking it. What would it look like if we could say our target is 97, 98, 99% occupancy and made that the target instead of 94%. And so that's how we attacked it. And so this is out of that came our sort of functional specialization pod structure of management. And one of those specialized functions is leasing. And leasing as a revenue driver, leasing as a professional sales team whose goal is to drive better conversions, get more leases, give a better resident first impression, better resident experience, and create more opportunities for faster leasing, faster turnovers, just a better experience overall. So that's right. That's sort of where we started the conversation here.
Yeah, and that speaks to some topics that we've talked about in previous episodes where, if you take a step back and look at the infrastructure of most properties, it's putting the least experienced employees on the front lines to try to drive revenue into the building, which if you're standing back and thinking about that, it doesn't really make sense. And so you have typically very green, leasing agents that meet you at the door that may or may not be able to answer all your questions, certainly aren't necessarily trained in sales. But the sort of the keys to the castle are in their hands to make the revenue numbers work for a property, which, as we know, doesn't necessarily work most of the time.
No, again, it's just this legacy way of thinking. Whereas, the most entry junior level person is doing leasing on most multifamily properties in America. And those people are hoping to move up the career ladder to become an assistant property manager or maybe to a property manager, maybe to a regional manager. But it sort of totally belies the fact that this is one of the most important functions to drive property NOI, property capitalized value, resident experience, all of these things. To have someone, come in an entry level or lower level position, being one of your lowest, paid employees, and have a few weeks of training and stick them on site and hope they know what they're doing, it's just led to a lot of dysfunction. Again, that has created the problem where there's, you're happy with 94% occupancy. And so that's really the big thing that we're trying to solve for. And obviously we can dive into, and I'd love to sort of dive into some of the specifics of how our leasing function operates. But really that's the crux of it. That's the underlying fundamental issue. Whereas what we have said is we need a professional sales team to be our leasing function for properties.
Mm-hmm. So let's dive in. Let's dive into the alternative approach, I'll call it, which is this idea of more of an on-demand program when it comes to leasing. What does that mean for those listening who maybe have never heard that term or certainly haven't necessarily heard you talk about it before?
Yeah, another flaw, even if we get past the entry level kind of employee as your leasing coordinator or leasing assistant, is the fact that you've got your on-site property management team, or even if they're off-site, basically doing showings for tours for new residents during office hours of like 10 to 4, let's say on weekdays, and maybe 10 to 3 on the weekends, or whatever. Whatever the schedule is, it's some sort of fixed schedule, because that's what you do. You have a schedule. You're at the office. If you can do a tour during that time, great. And so a lot of companies and operators have said, hey, what can we do to solve for the fact that most people actually want to come tour properties after hours, after they get done with their work, and on the weekends. And so you've seen many fall into this trap of self-guided tours, which is really a massive mistake that's costing a lot of occupancy at a lot of properties right now. Because I think humans want to interact with humans more often. They need help to be sort of making those types of decisions of where they want to live, and that's a sort of long story. I think we've talked about that a little bit in the past, but most importantly, we have said, okay, yeah, that's right. We want to be able to meet residents or prospective residents, sort of quote unquote, where they are, when they want where they are. So our leasing team operates on an on-demand basis, rather than being sitting at an office twiddling their thumbs all day waiting for people to walk in the door. They're out there and are able to accommodate appointments. They don't have fixed hours during the day. They are able to accommodate appointments after hours, after work. On an on-demand basis, they're able to accommodate appointments on the weekends, and frankly, they're paid well enough, and they're incentivized with incentive pay, so that they are willing and able and want to work what is a more diverse schedule, let's call it, so that they can meet the residents when they want to come in the door, and they can book appointments on an on-demand basis to meet with our team. And so we're not stuck in just saying, okay, no, I can't meet you before 4 o'clock on Tuesday, but we have this self-guided tour option if you want to come in at 6. No, we can actually run our full normal leasing playbook, meet people on site, deliver them an amazing hospitality resident experience, help them make the best decision for them at the property, and close far more leases that way. And so your marketing spend comes down, your conversion to lease goes up, your occupancy goes up, and frankly, also your resident experience goes up, because they've got this great first impression with these great people, leasing people that they're meeting, who are talented and know how to deliver a service experience that is great, and also helping them make a decision and really being that primary contact at the property. So it works in so many ways. We're solving the problem of set hours, we're delivering a better experience and better results for the property.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Transforming Cities, brought to you by Authentic, delivering premier multifamily brand experiences and smart digital marketing. Authentic's proven approach accelerates leasing velocity, boosts rental rates, and increases long-term value. You can find out more at AuthenticFF.com. And by Charlesgate, the multifamily investor's secret weapon to help underwrite, go to market, and operate projects that generate market-beating returns. With an adaptive staffing model and on-demand leasing teams, Charlesgate empowers a better resident experience at an efficient cost structure for today's owners. Visit charlesgate.com for more. There are a few other sort of points to get at with this conversation, and I want to make sure we have time for all of them. So I want to chat a little bit more about call it the management team aspect of this approach, because I think right now there's a lot of responsibilities that are put on the shoulders of the quote unquote on-site teams. And to your earlier point, there are a lot of green individuals in these roles that are trying to do a lot, and they don't have time to do it all necessarily very well. You approach the management team aspect in a very different way, very much focused on resident experience specifically. Talk a little bit more about that, and feel free to preface with what you're solving for here too, because I think that's important.
Yeah. So, this goes back to which I know we've had conversations about in the past, but this pod structure of our management team overall in this functional specialization of roles. And one of those functional specializations is resident services, and specifically having a carved out role that is focused on delivering a great resident experience. So they're tasked with, being responsive and receptive and communicative to residents better and faster and stronger than they could if they were having to do 10 different jobs, like, doing the budgeting, bill paying approval, leasing, triage of maintenance, everything else that has to get done by a property management team. But if you can say, we're going to carve out for a role to be specialized in delivering amazing resident experience, finding a way to build that relationship, the hospitality, that communications with them that delivers a better resident experience. And so some people would say, well, really, at the end of the day, who cares? What is it? If you're an owner or an investor, you might say, who cares? I'm not saying everyone does. I'm saying this is a question we've gotten and say, all right, what does it really matter for the property if the resident experience is like a little bit better than over there? Well, it matters because one of the things that comes out of that is, say, when we rethink how we're doing releasing, if you have a good communications cadence and a good relationship with the residents, guess what happens? What happens is when you ask them for longer notice, if they're going to vacate and move somewhere else, they give you that notice, right? So they'll let you know 3 or 4 months in advance that they're leaving instead of with just 30 days notice. And now guess what happens there? We can then remarket that unit well before it even becomes vacant, and we can start to release it to the next incoming resident before you even get to a vacancy and have to do a turn time and then release it after that fact. So what we're doing here is naturally shortening the turnover vacancy dramatically by being able to do that. And so rather than saying, okay, a unit becomes vacant, we've got a week or two, whatever, to turn it if you're slow, and then we're going to show it to prospective residents, and then it's going to take 4 weeks to lease it. So you got, naturally 2 months of vacancy on every turnover there, and hopefully not much worse than that. But I have seen worse. I've seen a little bit better too, but I've seen even worse than that. But for us, we're with being able to build those relationships, getting notice in advance, and by the way, going back to our conversations that we've had many times, having a brand that attracts and marketing that attracts residents to the property enables our leasing team to bring people in and also just frankly show occupied units as well if that are departing. Because we've got a great relationship with the residents, they're oftentimes more than willing to let us kind of tour with a new resident. So you've got a turned unit released before it even becomes vacant in the first place. That is super powerful to reducing your overall vacancy numbers for the year. And that's how I can say, as we let off at the beginning of the conversation, saying there's no reason that 93, 94% should be natural stabilized occupancy. Why can't it be 97, 98%? And these are the few tweaks that we've worked on to make sure we're enabled to do that and reducing the structural obstacles that are in the way from getting to that point.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there, and you jumped ahead to what my controversial point was going to be here, which is to say what you're speaking to isn't necessarily accepted practice across the country. I think that it's something that obviously you've been doing on the East Coast for quite a while. We've toured other properties in different parts of the country, and we've brought that up in conversation, and you kind of get the wide-eyed response of, can't even imagine showing a future renter an existing renter's place. What do you think that stems from? Is that just sort of like an OG industry practice? Is that a sort of cultural or regional thing? Where do you feel like that comes from?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just one of those, ultimately, the way we've always done it type of things. It's like, well, we've always done it this way, so why would we change? How are we gonna? It works fine. Why would we change? And it's like, well, I don't know. That's never been my personal mindset, and I think I'm hoping that I've built that culture into us as a company, and how we're always trying to break the status quo and do things better and find better and alternative ways to do things that make sense around a good set of goals. And so that's the big thing, is just say, why is it always this? And like, I also get it. There's certainly, there is a lot of potential pitfalls in doing that too. If you can't create a good resident experience, if you don't have a good relationship with residents, it can be a hardship. But we, have found a way, and it's not perfect, of course, like everything else that we do. We're always trying to get better and better. I love the phrase 1% better every day. So I'm not saying I have every answer or all the answers for every for everything we're doing by any means. But we found a way to make it work, and make it work very effectively, to, start with the foundation if we want to have an excellent resident experience, but there also needs to be that balance with driving better property performance, especially in today's market when uncontrollable costs are higher than ever before, and we've got to find other alternative, newer, more modern ways to execute and operate properties and lease properties so that we can drive NOI for owners and investors, and still deliver a great resident experience across the board. And so this is just one of those ways that I think we've sort of challenged the sort of quote unquote, best practices in the market that we don't think are actually, best in any way, shape, or form.
What advice would you give an owner or developer listening right now, watching right now, who this is resonating with them and they want to take the first step. Like, what do you have any simple sort of calculations you can throw out to them, or things they can, you know what I mean? What's the difference between 94% and 98% to them? Or, when you think about how they structure their leasing teams, any takeaways that you can give them just to start to, kind of bite into this idea a little bit more?
Well, look, the good news is most developers and most owners I know are really know their way around a spreadsheet. So doing this calculation is pretty easily. But if you take 100 units, let's say your average rent is $2,500, and you're moving occupancy 3-4% on average across 5 years. That's a hell of a lot of NOI. You're just recapturing, really with not a ton of other investment across the board. And I unfortunately am not Rain Man. I don't do math in my head. I do need the spreadsheet myself, so I can't do the math on the top of my head. But there's a lot of value to be unlocked there with just some simple tweaks like that. Now, again, the problem is, I say they're simple tweaks. They're really not simple tweaks. It's actually unfortunately, it's not simple, because it's a complete sort of realignment, structural reorganization of how properties are operated. So there are actually a lot of moving parts to it. And I don't think you could just say, okay, snap a finger, magic wand, start, showing occupied units or something like that and have it work. But I would say, look, I'm more than happy to spitball and talk with folks. I'm excited because we are in the process of expanding our services around the country, and so I'm happy to, happy to talk with anyone one-on-one and or to a group or whatever, and talk through how we've done it and some of the challenges we face, some of the solutions we found to the challenges, and some of the pitfalls that we still occasionally run into doing things the way we do it. But so for sure, I think that's probably the number one way. But there's just so much unlock that could be had by rethinking a few of these practices that are totally ingrained in the industry unnecessarily.
Mm-hmm. I love it. This is a great conversation, and I think one we could probably spend another 30-45 minutes on. There's definitely a lot more to unpack here, but in terms of high level improving post stabilized leasing and thinking about the performance and how to even re-architect the approach and the team, this was great. Looking forward to talking to you more about this in future episodes, Mike. Thanks for your time today.
Awesome, Chris. Good chatting with you.